There is a lot of outrage right now about SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, and for good reason. If you've seen that chart floating around showing how federal spending on food stamps has more than doubled in the past 5 years, yeah, it's pretty concerning. It's a problem. And you might be wondering, what the hell is going on? Well, the truth is, like most things in the government, it's pretty messy because we are in the middle of a federal government shutdown because lawmakers can't agree on a budget bill for 2026. And we know that tucked away in that budget bill are major changes to SNAP, changes that could cut off food access for millions of Americans. And at this point, already kind of is. So, yes, people have the right to be upset. 1,000,000%. But before we jump into outrage, I think it's just so important that we break down what's really happening here because it is a lot more complicated than just cutting SNAP benefits. Since October 1st, the government has been partially shut down. We know this, right? It's been all over the news. And because of that, SNAP payments, which assist about 42 million Americans with putting food on the table, are now delayed or uncertain. And the USDA has said it can't distribute any new benefits until the government shutdown ends. But judges are stepping in and they are trying to force emergency payments. And as of about a couple of hours ago, the Trump administration has agreed to partially resume around $5 billion in contingency funds while the government continues to be shut down. But that $5 billion isn't even enough to cover a full month of SNAP benefits. So you've got families scared, relying on food banks. You've got states scrambling to fill in the gaps to help millions of people who are basically unsure if they'll be able to buy groceries this month and once the funds run out. And this is all because Congress can't agree on a budget. Okay, so the sticking point here is OBA, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. And this is the Republicans' latest budget proposal. Within that budget, it includes massive reforms to SNAP. Republicans argue that the SNAP program's costs have exploded. And honestly, they are not wrong. SNAP spending doubled since 2020. But mostly because of pandemic aid, inflation, higher food prices, and here is the kicker, expanded eligibility, which we'll see in a second why this was an issue because SNAP has wound up being distributed to people who may not qualify for it, including illegal immigrants, and this has become a major issue. So the solution to this is to basically rip the floor out from underneath SNAP, tighten eligibility, and completely slash the funding by some estimates of up to $185 billion in the next 10 years. So the result of all of this is basically a political standoff between Republicans and Democrats, where SNAP has become a bargaining chip in a much bigger fight to agree on government spending. And it's gotten really ugly because these are not just numbers on a spreadsheet. These are human lives that we're messing with. These are families, these are kids, and 42 million Americans are being impacted by the government's incompetence and inability to work together to come to an agreement. So before we get into how the program is being abused, I think it's really important to understand what's actually changing under OBA, or the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. So before OBA, states had more flexibility. If unemployment was high, the states could waive work requirements and allow people to receive SNAP benefits just for a temporary period of time until they were able to get back on their feet again. And SNAP requirements were for adults aged 18 to 49 or in some states age 54, and they had to work for at least 80 hours a week to stay eligible. But there were special exemptions for veterans, parents, foster youth, and people experiencing homelessness. Now, under OBA, those rules are much stricter. Anyone aged 18 to 65 without dependents has to meet those same 80 hours per week work requirements to be eligible for SNAP. And parents are only exempt if they have children under 14 instead of 18. And most states are losing the ability to waive any of those requirements, even if they have high unemployment rates. The law also tightened rules for non-citizens, limiting the categories of illegal immigrants who can qualify, and they're also adding new documentation requirements to ensure that people are not slipping through the cracks. Additionally, OBA began shifting more of the financial responsibility for SNAP from the federal government to the states. So, in summary, OBA didn't just trim the edges of SNAP, it is fundamentally changing how SNAP operates, tightening access while passing more of the funding to the states rather than relying on the federal government. And here's the part that's getting a lot of attention on the right, and understandably so. There's been real abuse of SNAP and abuse to the system over the past 5 years. During the pandemic, eligibility rules were softened and a lot of families were in need of food. So in order to do that, there was changes made to SNAP so families could receive benefits. There was a more open door policy, which sort of opened the door for misuse. So essentially, we're talking about billions of taxpayer dollars being stretched thin to cover people who are not even citizens of the United States, and that in and of itself deserves to be addressed.
Day one of USDA, February 13th, is we sent letters to every governor in America being very clear that no illegal aliens can use SNAP. 0, 0, 0. We asked every state for the first time in history, and this was in February, to send us their data and let us, with DOJ and a war room, actually start going through this data to better understand how this explosion of SNAP benefits happened under Joe Biden. We increased almost 40% on this program in just a couple of years under the Biden administration.
So basically, Brooke Rollins, the USDA secretary, requested SNAP data from all 50 states on February 13th, 2025 to investigate why the program has grown to 42 million enrollees and $119 billion in spending since 2019. And she was trying to uncover any fraud, such as people collecting SNAP benefits for deceased elders or relatives in multiple states who were not citizens of the United States. But instead of building smarter guardrails, what Congress is now doing is slashing the program at the roots. And that is a big issue because the system is not being reformed, it's being hollowed out. Unless things start to change and the government can reach a consensus and get on the same team, which is the team of the American people, we're gonna wind up in the same spot that we are now. Here's where I think that the conversation really needs to shift. Yes, SNAP has been abused. Yes, the costs have skyrocketed, but we are missing the bigger picture. The whole point here is what that money is actually funding. Right now, over half of SNAP purchases go towards ultra-processed foods, frozen meals, soda, sugary cereals, packaged snacks. About 20% of all SNAP dollars are spent on soda and junk food. And let me remind you what SNAP means, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. Nutrition is no longer at the forefront of SNAP. And some changes are being made under the direction of RFK Jr. to kind of get back to that. As of mid-2025, 6 states, including Texas, Oklahoma, Colorado, Florida, West Virginia, and Louisiana, have received waivers to prohibit the purchase of soda, candy, sugar-sweetened beverages, chips, cookies, and other ultra-processed foods under SNAP. And other states like Arkansas, Idaho, Indiana, Nebraska, Iowa, and Utah are developing similar bans or limits with the USDA approval. And some of these bans are taking effect as early as January of 2026. And this is definitely a step in the right direction. SNAP was designed to help families access nutritious food, not subsidize soda and junk food that contribute to obesity, diabetes, and other chronic disease. But of course, we have that pushback from critics arguing that these bans oversimplify a much deeper problem. In many low-income communities, fresh food just isn't accessible if they live in food deserts or places where their only grocery stores are gas stations or Dollar General. To make matters worse, under OBA, the new bill completely defunds SNAP Ed, the program that teaches families how to cook and make healthier food choices. That's the part that's truly heartbreaking for me, because SNAP Ed was one of the only parts of the program that was actually designed to break the cycle of poor nutrition and chronic disease in lower income communities. So here's the bottom line. The government is using SNAP as political leverage, not as a tool for public health. So yes, we need to hold our leaders accountable, and you have every right to be outraged. Completely slashing the system is not the solution. Getting rid of SNAP education is not the solution. The solution is working together to reframe and restructure a program that has a ton of potential. But first, we need to agree on the budget. Senators, we are calling on you to make a decision and to reform these programs in a way that actually makes sense without cutting funds to millions of Americans who could actually use them. Educate Americans, teach them how to use their SNAP dollars, teach them how to purchase healthy whole foods. Don't allow SNAP to cover soda and junk food and ultra-processed food, because these are the very things that are driving chronic illness and are keeping us stuck in a healthcare system that profits off of us being sick. What do you think about this? I want to hear your thoughts in the comments, and let's get happy about food again.